Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Sharon Florentine. Welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, The Next Thinking Regarding Cloud Native Application Security, brought to you by DevOps Institute. I am joined today by Eveline Oehrlich. She is the Chief Research Officer with DevOps Institute, and we are going to have an awesome webinar for you today. But before we get started, I need to go through some housekeeping items with you. First of all, please remember that this session is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of it, you will be able to go back and watch it again. You can submit any questions you have at any time during the presentation using the Q&A tab on your console there, so go ahead and send those in at any time. We will try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And finally, stick around because we are doing a drawing at the end for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So stick around to see if you are a winner. All right, well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eveline and turn my camera off, put myself on mute. Eveline, it's all yours.
Super. Thank you, Sharon. And thank you, everybody else, for being here to watch us instead of the Olympics. Hopefully, that is going to give you some excitement as well. The next thinking regarding cloud native application security. I will also turn my camera off in a little bit, but before I do that, I wanted to quickly introduce myself. As Sharon already said, I'm Chief Research Officer at the DevOps Institute. I'm also an industry analyst and have been following and working in the DevOps and related topic areas for a long time. I won't tell you how many years. Before joining the DevOps Institute, I was actually Vice President and Research Director at Forrester Research, where I've followed and done research on DevOps and, again, related topics. Quickly, review on the agenda here. So we'll talk a little bit through the state of application security. I have some good, bad, and ugly things I want to share with you. I hope you don't mind. Then I want to give you a few perspectives, and then we'll talk about AppSec and DevOps. And then I have a wonderful, fantastic gentleman who you get to meet in a second with me, Yasser Fuentes, who will actually talk us through the secured paved road with Bitdefender. Then we'll come back for some conclusions, and hopefully you guys have all had a chance to ask some questions, and we'll have some time to answer questions. So Yasser, here you go. Who are you?
Thank you, Eveline. So yeah, my name is Yasser. I work at Bitdefender as a Cloud and MSP Solutions Architect. I've been a security practitioner for almost 20 years. Pretty passionate about security and about cloud. So I'm happy and honored to be here in this webinar today.
Super. And what I've learned while I've been working with Yasser on this, preparing for this, 2 important things are passion and good coffee. So hopefully you have those, brought that with you. So I'm going to turn my camera off and advance to this particular slide, just to talk a little bit about, first of all, the good things. The good things really is that you're here, and we really appreciate your time because we know there are a lot of competing events and competing webinars. So from us at the DevOps Institute, Media Ops, and Bitdefender, thank you for your time. This is really awesome. If you're familiar with this movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I wanted to share a few things on the bad and the ugly side. I don't think it will take a lot of imagination for me to point out which is bad and which is ugly, but if I do need to, I certainly will. So let's get started. We know today the reality is that, and this is from some data, in 2021, 2,169 new alerts of potential app security vulnerabilities each month. That is typical average for an enterprise. However, important to know that only 42% of those alerts are actually requiring any actioning. And so you can imagine that that is, of course, not a good ratio, which means there is a significant amount of waste, or sometimes toil, if you want to call it that. And if we think about that in terms of dollars, we can see here there is a significant amount of labor cost wasted. So 30% of time wasted per week by application security teams on vulnerability tasks. Again, 1.9 million might not be that much if you think about some other wasted money, but certainly is a pretty good sum, adding it on back to the bottom line and maybe using it for something else. So I think I would qualify that as pretty ugly. Now, I wanted to talk through a couple of key areas which describe to us why there are some challenges and what's impacting the detection of vulnerabilities within organizations. And so the first focus is really around the people and the process. Not enough time spent within the development to resolve vulnerabilities is one of the challenges we're hearing from the developers who we work with and talk to at the DevOps Institute. Because they're, of course, needing to ensure that they're doing their work on the design and the ideation and don't necessarily want to be bothered with any time spent on resolving vulnerabilities while they're doing what they're doing in their coding or in their building. Second, lack of skills across the value chain to take the responsibility. Now, that's something which isn't new because the security topic has always been owned by a separate organization. And we'll get to that in a little bit later topic area. DevOps team won't work with the security team to avoid slowdowns, as the DevOps team is all about high performing and velocity. They're not as crazy about taking some time to slow down their velocity because of some testing or some vulnerability checking. The app team bypasses the vulnerability scan to keep up the velocity. That's also, of course, a challenge. And then many security tools today, which are in the market, are actually slowing down the DevOps activity as they only focus on one stage of the software development lifecycle. That is changing, and we'll get to that later on as well. Here again, another data point from a survey. 89% of those survey participants said that the application blind spots have been created through the introduction of containers and Kubernetes. And so we do know that there are a significant amount of workloads in containers and Kubernetes. We'll have some data point to that as well. Now, if we look at the technology factors, again, as I mentioned, container runtime environments are increasing, hybrid or multi-cloud environments are increasing because of, again, the flexibility of those environments, and IT infrastructure teams and enterprise teams are, of course, adopting those new architectures. We also know that traditional security tools and controls don't necessarily fit for cloud native environments because they cannot do certain things. And particularly if we think about vulnerabilities within the containerized production environment, there is some of those tools don't actually provide real time visibility, which makes it very difficult because, as we know, these containerized production environments are very, very volatile and very dynamic. And so real time is an absolute must. The difficulty for the security tool also, in some cases, to keep up with the fast changes in the containerized environments causes challenges, and open source and related security hygiene, which isn't practiced, are causing additional challenges. Now, a couple of interesting facts here. So if we look at the production workloads today in the enterprises, and this is a global figure, 58% of production workloads are deployed as containers, 21% serverless, and 51% infrastructure as a code. And with our desire towards digitalization and digital transformation and organizations containing or continuing to drive that transformation, this will only get, I should say, better, or sometimes maybe the numbers will go up in terms of these type of environments and how they look. I mentioned open source. We can see here from 2015, the open source code-based growth has gone up to 70%. So from 2015 of 36% to 2021 of 70%. So open source is having a heyday. But again, within open source, there are some vulnerabilities and it requires additional work. As another data point important, just to make that point, how important security must be thought of and how what challenges they are is the exposure of APIs and the growth in percentage. You can see here 25 to 50% growth, 35%, and then 33% growth between 50 and 75. So APIs, because of a lot of connections into the ecosystem of be it backend systems or be it databases or whatever other applications and services within the environment. Now I borrowed this slide from my former colleagues at Forrester, and you can see here the vulnerabilities. The software vulnerabilities are in the 4th place relative to where there are some challenges, the biggest challenges. Of course, web applications, lost or stolen assets, we hear about that all the time. Computer malware, of course, but again, as number 4 with 30% saying that that is their biggest challenge is why we are here to share with you some ideas and some thoughts. From a perspective of the different owners, I think this is also critical because I'm assuming in the audience we have a variety of different roles. So if you are a CISO, you might be familiar with this. As we know from the data, CISOs currently have a low confidence in application security, which is not a good fact. And I would call that an ugly situation. DevOps folks are saying, well, application security really impacts velocity and we can't really be slowed down. And then from a security perspective, they're saying that they're wasting time and effort during runtime. Again, we saw some of the challenges relative to the vulnerabilities and the wasted time. And then from a customer or an end user or an employee perspective, there is a tremendous amount of frustration and threats. So all these different perspectives really are slowing down some of the adoption, but at the same time, we see the growth in terms of the DevSecOps tool market or the application security market is growing. I was just checking today, and if we look at DevSecOps, the tool market in 2020, according to IDC, was $2.6 billion US. In 2025, that tool market is predicted to grow to $7.5 billion US, which again, I think gives some testimony to what is in store and how organizations are hopefully adopting some of these DevSecOps best practices and, of course, the app security tools with it. Okay, quickly definition. I'm not going to read this to you. This is a very simple definition from Wikipedia. I'm sure all of you who are here don't need a definition, but just making sure we're all on the same page is always important as an analyst, that we all kind of know what we're talking about. All right, so we talked about challenges. We talked about the different perspectives. We know that there is a significant amount of people and process challenges and challenges relative to the technology. Let's continue our journey and look at this from the DevOps perspective, or let's call it the CICD pipeline. Before going there, I do think it's necessary to kind of talk through these different terms, because I do get a lot of questions when I'm in virtual events or if I speak to folks around the topic of application security and DevOps and DevSecOps. And I already mentioned the growth in terms of the predictive fact of $7.5 million US in 2025. Important is that we know that DevSecOps is actually bringing, if we talk about DevSecOps, is bringing application security into the automated development and operations environment. Instead of in the traditional application security way, which kind of was in some cases, in some organizations are still doing that, where application security is a separate topic. So that's when we think about DevSecOps. A second thing to know is that when we leverage DevOps methodologies within app application security, we are seeing that we are reporting not just on vulnerabilities, but we're actually needing to make sure that we shift left to the developer who actually has to think about security before it goes to the next stage. When we see here our pipeline of the CICD. So many of the touch points across the value stream here, be it code, commit, build, or bringing in related code, have to already should already be thought of, and security needs to be a topic as part of that. And that's sometimes we talk about this left shifting. Of course, unit testing, integration testing, and many other types of testing here in this second bubble here with the review, and then in the CD pipeline, the staging and production, all different touch points in the life cycle of an application or of a value stream, which need to be thought of. And that means that security must be part of the conversations across the different roles and the different owners. And that makes it sometimes challenging because, again, a lot of the issues are that many of the folks who are doing the ideation and the development are not necessarily aware of what is necessary from a best practice perspective. Now, we do see a couple of, actually 3 things which are happening. One is that pipeline friction can happen. What that means is that the throughput rate of when we do some security work across these different bubbles in case could potentially be slowed down, and the build might happen faster than the actual analysis of security. So sometimes called, again, pipeline friction. We also see that sometimes developers are not necessarily, I say, crazy about testing, and that could cause friction, again, with those who are downstream, either in the operations team or in the review team or in the testing team. And then last but not least, and we saw that earlier, vulnerability overload sometimes happens because there's just too many false alarms which are not necessarily meaningful and mean anything. And if you remember earlier, 46% of them only in the state I gave you the data, only 46% of them are actionable. So you can kind of see how many false alarms are there, which causes that vulnerability overload. Again, those are some challenges we're seeing relative to this entire life cycle and touch points. Now, at the bottom, there are some terms which I'm sure you're familiar with. The software composition analysis, typically tools which examine the origins of all components and libraries within the software. These tools are highly effective at identifying and finding vulnerabilities in common and popular components and open source components particularly. They do not, however, detect vulnerabilities for in-house custom developed components. So be aware of that. You probably know that. Next, the static application security testing, SAST. They can be thought of white box testing, really, where the tester knows the information about the system or software being tested, and included architecture diagrams and a variety of other things. Next, of course, the dynamic application security testing tools, which can be thought of black box testing, where the tester has no prior knowledge of what's happening, and they detect the conditions that indicate a security vulnerability in an application and in its running state. And then last but not least, RASP, or Runtime Application Self-Protection, is a technology that runs on a server and kicks in when the application is actually in run mode, and it's designed to attack or to detect attacks on the application in real time. So not telling you anything new here, but these are typically the kind of tools which are associated with the different with these different cycles. The one or other tool is sometimes covering multiple aspects. And so we'll get a little bit later to that. And Yasser will give you some fantastic details on what they can do and where they are focused. Now, here's another list of a few things I actually have not necessarily put into the slides, such as mobile application testing, interactive security or application security testing, penetration testing, all different types of testing practices. Now, I want to ask Yasser a question because I know he has some thoughts on the adopting or the adoptability of these types of testing practice. Yasser, what would you say are the most, let's call them popular or the most used testing practices you know from your customers?
Yeah, sure. From the feedback that we got from customers and prospects, for the most part is static application testing being one of the most popular ones. Some of them, they perform a little bit of dynamic application testing as well. And something very surprising for us is that there's a little bit of runtime application, but that's being the least as testing best practices overall. Another thing that I want to mention here in this regard is that I don't see a special attention or focus when it comes to third-party code testing. And I was just reading a couple of articles recently, especially one from Betacode, that they were mentioning that in average, what you can get from these third-party components in terms of your applications is around 71 vulnerabilities per application. And what is more alarming is that almost 25% of the organizations in question, they were able to actually take care of these testing and address these vulnerabilities within their applications. And last but not the least is the inclusion of abuse or fuse testing within the testing practices. So that's something that we all forget because of the dynamics of making sure that everything is hits production as soon as possible. Of course, development team and engineering teams, they have OKRs, but this is something really, really important, having that hacker perspective when it comes to pen testing your applications.
Super, very cool. I have another list for you. I won't read through them because there's a variety of other things which I haven't mentioned, things like static code analysis, API security, client-side protection. Any thoughts on these where you see some adoption and what your customers are saying?
Sure. First of all, one of the main observations is that being proactive on the vulnerability side doesn't mean that you're taking care of the most important piece, which should be risk management. So we see a lot of folks today trying to identify vulnerabilities and trying to patch those vulnerabilities, but not everything can be related to a patch, and not all vulnerabilities can be related to a specific risk. So that's something that we see as a piece that is basically missing. And another thing is compliance, right? So we know that many applications that are being produced, they are going to be serving specific verticals or sectors, in the case of the government sector or the public, and they will be highly regulated. So compliance is an important piece of this exercise as well.
Thank you, Yasser, for that color. All right. Complex made simple. Now, again, here, apologize for my poor graphics because I wanted to make this graphic simple, and I think it still is simple. And the point really here is that not only talking about continuous integration and continuous delivery in the world of DevOps, we must start thinking about continuous integrated security. Is this something which is owned by a team, or is this a topic relative to, of course, a think tank which is put together, or whatever implementations or whatever organizational changes you need to make? It has to be there to support the CICD or the DevOps journey. And I think, again, with regards to the different types of tools and technologies, we'll get to that in a little bit. But I wanted to make sure that everybody understands that this is a very important strategy. A lot of organizations are starting to put some funding aside and are thinking through relative to the future. Now, again, if we look at the tools from the bottom to the top, in terms of maturity level, there is of course, the goal for a high continuous integrated security strategy is to get there. You see a few other things here, interactive AST, which is a combination of DAST and SAST. There's also this AST as a service, which is really helping you for scaling. And I think Yasser is talking about that as well later on. And down here, you can see again the different types of tools we talked about already. All right, so before I hand this over to Yasser, because he has a lot of fantastic things, there's a couple of, actually 3 additional data points. I wouldn't be an analyst if I wouldn't give you data points. So we do know that cloud native has increased security concerns across all roles. And from studies, more than 80% are actually recognizing that security is a top issue within cloud native. And I am a German optimist, and I think that's the good news. We also know that 28% of global security tech decision makers will improve application security capabilities within or at the end of 2021 and beyond. Again, that goes aligned or is aligned with the data I have shared with you from IDC on the tooling and the funding there. And then 21% of global tech decision makers will build security within their development processes. And those are really some good things I wanted to share with you before I hand the microphone over to you, Yasser.
Thank you so much, Eveline. Definitely great insights for the community. So thank you again. And my presentation, first of all, I would like to start with a quote here. This is one of my favorite quotes. And the main reason why I selected this for the presentation is because everything in life turns around the correlation between perception and reality, right? So when it comes to perception, the expectation actually is that application or developers that are developing these applications, they are expected to understand security. They are expected to produce or develop applications that are secure by design, right? However, the reality is that unless you're really passionate about security, besides things that you can do in order to keep your application secure, the likelihood of developers becoming a security expert is extremely low, right? Also, if we look at this from a different angle, we can see that in terms of critical security controls, we can see that there's more than 20 if you go anywhere from pre-commit to commit, acceptance, and even operations, right? So basically here, we want to simplify this process for you and let you focus on the most important things that you should while we take care of security. Okay, just a brief intro about Bitdefender for the ones that are not familiar with our company. So we are a global security innovator, cybersecurity innovator. We started in this business in 2001. Our company is, I would say, 100% technology based. That means that more than half of our staff is either in R&D or engineering. So this is really fascinating and something that I'm pretty excited about Bitdefender. We have a large community and footprint out there when it comes to customers, partners, and technology partners as well throughout the world. Now, something that I wanted to share with you, which in my opinion is really key, is what is our RGB? What is the core of our strategy when it comes to developing and providing security solution? And this is basically the main purpose here is just to keep an optimized balance between performance, efficacy, and manageability. So meaning that our solutions are mainly focused on this. When you look at some other folks in the industry that they're doing pretty well, the main focus is around features and functionalities, but our main goal here is to bring the key pieces, the key components that can strategize your security practices. And probably that's the reason why Bitdefender is trusted by multiple partners, customers, technology alliances. You can see some of this information as well as some recognition in this slide. Now, getting inside the topic, I would like to start with, or I would like to add a little bit more context and content when it comes to concerns and what is it that we see in the cyberspace. And the very first one that I wanted to start off with is the perception or misconception that if you have, image scanners, if you have vulnerability scanners, if you have these best practices that we talked about before within your CICD pipeline, why should you care about runtime, right? So you're making sure beforehand that there's no vulnerability within the images that are going to run your applications. However, if you're familiar with Gartner's Continuous and Adaptive Risk and Trust Assessment, or CARTA for short, they tell you that just solely focusing on preventative controls is not enough, right? So you should definitely have controls in place, security controls in place that can tell you about what happens at the runtime. And additionally, I would like to mention here as a security practitioner that I haven't seen any attacks happening on pre-execution or basically on access without having processes running. So there is the criticality of the monitoring the runtime, right? We also see multiple vulnerabilities, and this is something very critical as well, that are being issued on a yearly basis, on a quarterly basis. And what we can see is, more and more. And these vulnerabilities are known today because we have these signatures, so we have this telemetry within the scanners that you're using. However, at the moment that they are released, they are 0 days. And this is what we should expect moving forward, right? So another component, critical component, and that is missing from many security applications, is an advanced anti-exploit security control. Now, if we move a little bit forward and talk about the runtime risk, threats, and vulnerability as a combination, we can see, especially on the latest data breaches, and I'm not going to mention any name for the sake of time, but we can see more and more attacks happening because of these main key issues. One of them being insider threats. We can see this especially in the public cloud with individuals and even former employees of CSPs that have privileged access still, even though they are not working for that CSP anymore, and we see them facilitating and orchestrating attacks. We can also see one of the main reasons why this happening is because of compromised credentials. It's not enough how much we shared about best practices in terms of credentials and identity access management. We continue to see more and more of these. And one that I want to mention here really key, in my opinion, is the over-reliance on container image repositories. For instance, Docker Hub. In Docker Hub or in these public repositories, anybody can publish an image, right? And we see a lot of companies, a lot of development team or engineering teams using these compromised or pre-compromised images on their production infrastructure. Reason why these attacks continue to happen every day. Now, talking about key challenges that we see in the space, especially around containerized applications and security as a whole, is these main three. So we see a lot of folks trying to protect their infrastructure, trying to protect their nest, basically the environment, whether it's orchestrated or unorchestrated, where they have their containers and their applications. But there is a compatibility issue because that security solution that they are trying to use or that they use already in their data center, it cannot be added or it cannot be used in the public cloud, right? And we also see in the meantime that most of the solutions that we have available today, they are strategically designed for a specific piece of this. So to protect applications or to protect the nest where the applications are, but not necessarily to cover the entire stack that you have behind the scenes. And this is also a challenge. In security, we have a saying that says, never put all your eggs in one basket. However, how many hands do we have to handle the different baskets that are recommended, right? And again, I'm not against this philosophy if you can afford it, right? But when it comes to the application security, it has to be more agile, right? It has to be more centralized. And in fact, that also brings problems when it comes to visibility, because now you would have to look at different consoles, at different solutions, and you might also be limited to a specific pieces when it comes to security workflows, right? You might have visibility on vulnerabilities, but you don't have visibility on risk as a whole, or you might have visibility on a specific host-related vulnerabilities, but you don't have visibility on what's going on inside the containers or at the runtime. So how is it that we try to solve this, and what is it that we advise in terms of best practices? So we recommend a solution that can provide you with a security stack with multiple security controls that can go anywhere from risk management, anywhere from uncovering vulnerabilities and risk pretty much to those assets that you're trying to use and that you're trying to leverage your applications on, to anti-malware capabilities, not only relying on signatures and old school technologies, but also relying on AI and machine learning to be able to identify and prevent the most elusive type of threats in the cyber threat landscape. As I mentioned before, advanced anti-exploit is key because, again, not everything can be prevented. You, as I mentioned before, are not aware of zero-day vulnerabilities up until an attack happens, up until an exploit takes place. So that is a key component. And one key component as well is the extended capabilities on endpoint detection or response. This is key because, as Eveline mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of alerts that you can receive with the existing tool set that you use right now for security. However, how do you narrow down these alerts into valid security incident? How you strategically read into these tools to understand what is important and what you should pay attention to, right? Now, if we look at how we solve this specifically related to the key challenges, so when it comes to compatibility, Bitdefender offers compatibility, removing the kernel driver's dependency from the specific distribution that you're using or platform that you're using, covering anywhere from cloud-based native distributions to even old school or legacy, as we call it, distributions as well. And this is not only limited to the specific distributions, but also to the specific platforms used for containerized applications. Anywhere from Cryo to Docker to Containerd, we can basically cover all of them. Another piece of it that I mentioned is manageability. So having that capability to pretty much protect and manage everything from a single pane of glass. So that way you can see anywhere from what you have on your hosted environment or your on-premise environment to the public cloud, whether it's a Linux operating system or Windows or Mac, or if we're talking about a hypervisor as well. And in terms of manageability, something that is really key is to have different options when it comes to satisfying requirements. For instance, if I'm developing or serving solutions, that applications that are going to be used as a service, and I'm going to do so for a specific market that is highly regulated, I should have the option to have a management console that I can isolate and I can use in that isolated environment where I have my control and internet restricted applications, right? And we're talking about it can be a data center or it can be hosted in the public cloud or in the use of the infrastructure as a service as well. Also, very important to extend these capabilities to the public cloud. Today, we see that you have to deal with your applications with development cycles. So we don't want you to spend time managing all the resources and components behind the scenes that you need to spin up and orchestrate in order to have a management console. So that's why we see the importance of having both flavors, a console where you can use it on-prem, as I mentioned before, and a console that can be offered in a SaaS fashion. When it comes to visibility, I mentioned that this is a key component because you should be able to identify not only what you know, not only till the point that what you can see with your current tooling, but also see beyond, see processes and dependencies of these processes and how they interact, and if there's any vulnerability or if there's any specific flag that we might highlight as potentially malicious or potentially suspicious. This would allow you to identify in early stages, as early as QA testing, how effective your security practices are when it comes to this application that you're about to release. And this is also true to the extended capabilities. So that's what I mentioned before, that having the extended endpoint detection or response is key, because as Eveline mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of blind spots that restrain or restrict you from seeing what is really important. So how do you see the interactions of that container or that containerized application with the rest of your network? How do you see that image that you deploy from Docker Hub interacting with the rest of your network? So this is really essential when it comes to security visibility. Now, here we're not talking about any security solution that we just developed or something that we're considering to bring to the table. We're talking about highly rated security solutions. And I say highly rated because every year we participate in the MITRE ATT&CK framework test. And this is the results of the most recent one, where you can see that our solutions, specifically for Linux, achieve the top detections when it comes to the security stack that we have in place, anywhere from early stages to even runtime execution and post-execution as well. This is public information, and in fact, I know that many of you are used to leverage Gartner or some other sources of information to make informed decisions. When it comes to security, I would highly encourage you to use MITRE ATT&CK framework as a trusted source as well. Now, in terms of flavors or how these solutions, security solutions, are shipped, it is key to have the option to provide these solutions anywhere from an agent that can protect from the file system up to the containerized application. Can be Docker, can be Kubernetes, or any platform that you're using, as well as having this shipped in a way that can serve also to platform as a service, meaning in environments where you don't have direct access to the host and you only have limited access to these nodes specifically. So this is really important because you might have hybrid cloud infrastructure, and this is critical to be able to satisfy both environments where you have access to the server and when you don't have access to the specific server, and also with technologies that can be automated when it comes to scaling up. For instance, daemon set, right? Technology that allows you to spin up that container there automatically without the need to manually deploying this security solution node by node or container host by container host. In terms of security automation and scaling, something that we see in the market as critical is you should bake in security to containerized infrastructure, meaning orchestrated, even unorchestrated. This is a must to have, right? You cannot incorporate or expect any manual processes when it comes to scaling, right? Also, just to elaborate a little bit to the quote that I used at the beginning and to what I said that is my favorite quote, this is an example of, depicting that Bitdefender makes it easier for you. We make it simple and we recommend that as the right approach. However, security shouldn't be simpler, right? So this is our stack of security controls. um, Anywhere from the beginning where we can harden the surface, we can identify early stages, related risk and vulnerabilities, all the way up to prevention, detection, and response, and even some services that we can use to uh, monitor closely when it comes to those alerts that Eveline mentioned at the beginning that are blind spots for many of us. Now, it is also important that you have the capability to um, bake your security controls or solutions or applications within your infrastructure. That means that if you're spinning up a fleet of EC2 instances, for example, that you can make sure that you can create an image, ship Bitdefender or the security solution inside, and then spin up based on that template that you have as much as you can or as much as you need, basically. So it shouldn't be a manual process. As soon as you spin up a new VM or a new instance, you should have the capability to already have that agent or that container providing security from the ground up and from the very beginning. Um, this is an example of what I mentioned before in terms of security automation, right? So if I use our security solution to instruct Kubernetes to spin up the daemon set container for Bitdefender security on a specific node or on the cluster, as soon as a new node becomes available, we will make sure that that node comes protected by Bitdefender automatically. And this is key because we don't want you to do the approach of, for instance, sidecar containers, where you have to connect to the container host or connect to the node and then manually configure and spin up that specific pod. So the best approach and the right approach should be automated. Now, something that many of us overlook sometimes, and I say many of us because we are a security vendor, not because we do it, is the fact that we think security features and capabilities and solving, of course, market problems, but we forget about something that is key, and that is the trade-off between security and performance. So how much would I have to sacrifice by using solutions that are not optimized in my environment if I deploy that specific application that you're recommending to secure my infrastructure, right? So this is key, and most of what we see today's in the market is retrofitted endpoint protection solution, meaning that they are solutions that treat a VM or an instance or a containerized infrastructure as physical computers or physical endpoints, and that's definitely the wrong approach. So Bitdefender, just to give you a little bit of metrics in perspective, Bitdefender provides you with a design or an architecture that can offload all of the heavy lifting processes like scanning, updating from each specific container host or node into one dedicated security appliance. Security appliance that will take care of the scanning and the update process automatically, and that would, like I said, allow you to consolidate resources across the host or across the nodes that you're using. And the example that you see there with in terms of metrics is just for the RAM, but you can see that if you use a full-fledged agent on any VM or any instance, you can see around 300 megs, and that's with Bitdefender agent, which is optimized for any infrastructure. However, if you use the approach of central scanning, you can see no more than 50 megabytes being used by the security solution. And another point that I want to make here is that retrofitted um, solutions in the market, they don't take into account um, um, not only performance, but also compliance and privacy. So when it comes to scanning, Bitdefender doesn't need to take sensitive information from an object that needs to be scanned. Bitdefender can automatically go ahead and optimize that by basically extracting just the information that we need in order to emulate the threat, meaning a chunk of that file or that object that is capable of execution. So this reduces, of course, the traffic east to west, but also provides with that check mark when it comes to compliance and privacy. Okay. And then again, we're not talking about solutions just in terms of features and capabilities. We're talking about highly rated solutions. This is one of the examples that we use, a benchmark test performed by Login BSI, where they're comparing the fact of using no anti-malware solutions versus using Bitdefender security solution, compared even with Bitdefender solutions in other arenas like agentless and even with some other vendors. This is all public information and definitely highly recommend you to take a look at it. As part of the takeaways, at least from my side, from the perspective of securing the paved road anywhere from the pre-commit to the operational side, my suggestion would be to only rely on solutions that provide you with that extensive capability and support across distributions and platforms, as well as security solutions that provide you with full visibility and management across your entire infrastructure, heterogeneous, homogeneous, regardless of the environment that you're using. We also highly encourage you to use security automation and scalability as a process baked into your best practices, right? This is a must-to-have capability when it comes to security solutions. And also, we highly encourage you to look at benchmarks, right? And look for optimization. Look at vendors from the perspective of how much they can optimize. If we're talking about security operations, definitely a must-to-have would be identify both container and host-related risks, especially the ones aligned to CIS benchmarks, to proactively monitor container runtime, because as I said before, this is critical and non-attack happens pre-runtime. Basically, you need a process to execute. You need something to be in execution to exploit vulnerabilities and to take over the specific environment. And the last two pieces, as I mentioned before, always rely on solutions that provide you with advanced anti-exploits so you can identify zero-day type of threats. And rely on EDR capabilities that can provide you not only the perspective of what happened on that specific container host or node, but also to what happens on the interaction with that specific containerized environment and the rest of your network. And with that, Eveline, I pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great checklist. Yeah, so everybody who is listening in should print out that checklist and put it on your board somewhere. I've got a few tactical steps as well relative to what I would recommend. So really, as I mentioned, there are some challenges in open source. Educate on the usage of open source and other vulnerabilities within your team. Make it easier for developers to include security aspects. Now that means you as a security professional need to reach out to them. Don't wait until they come to you, because that certainly might not happen. And assess and evaluate current application security tools and possibly adjust what you have. And you saw here the great capabilities Bitdefender has. So these are just some tactical steps. Now for folks who are a little bit more thinking strategically, there is no way around education around the different roles in your organization. Again, no matter if you are modern or if you are heritage, so just a new word for you. Instead of legacy, I use the word heritage, but doesn't matter. You need to educate and across the security practices, all the roles which are part of your journey. Expand your tools within the traditional or the DevOps environment. do a check and see where you stand. Proactively understand new technologies and the application development plans, so you can actually use the checklist Yasser has shared with you to make sure that you are on top of it. And then shifting left, we've been talking about this for years. Start thinking about that. Maybe you've already gone that way. And there's multiple research papers out there. And as I mentioned, a continuous integrated security strategy is really what you should aim for. I know that is easy said by myself. If you do have questions, happy to give you additional pointers if you want to reach out to me or to Yasser. Now, I'm not going to go through this, but I put together a list of critical things to look through when you are choosing tools, and you can look at this on your own leisure. Really important to look through a variety of things in terms of the automation tools you choose, because that is part of your success besides the training and the education. All right, I am going to turn my camera back on because I know we have 3 minutes for questions before Sharon gets to the point where she hands out the gift certificates. So what questions can we answer?
You got it. All right. So let's see. Why don't we start with this one? Where do code repositories fall within the pipeline flow? And this one came in, Eveline, kind of at the beginning of yours when you had that fantastic diagram about CICD pipelines. So where do code repositories fall within that pipeline?
Most likely, so that's not necessarily a security question, but it's really more of a DevOps question. So it's really kind of in the, I wish I could go quickly back to the slides. It's kind of in the middle, in the bubble, in the middle circle of the three circles. That's typically where code repositories fall within the pipeline flow.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I was trying to click back and wasn't letting me do that. So sorry. All right, let's see. What else do we have here? Okay. Yasser, I'm going to direct this one to you. Does XEDR work with security for containers?
Yes, that's a good question. So as I show on my presentation on the slides, we have extended endpoint detection and response capabilities that can go anywhere from containers to container host and the whole infrastructure that you have integrated with Bitdefender. So the answer is yes.
Excellent. All right. I think since we've got about 2.5 minutes until the top of the hour, I'm going to wrap up questions there. But folks, if we did not get to your question, rest assured, I'm going to pull all those together, send them over to Eveline and Yasser, and they will be able to follow up with you offline. And as Eveline mentioned, it is now time for us to hand out our Amazon gift cards. And so our first winner today is John L. Congratulations to John. Our next winner is Daniel A. Congratulations, Daniel. Our third winner is Luis T. Congratulations to Luis. And finally, our fourth winner is Garrett G. Congratulations to all our Amazon gift card winners. We will be sending you an email with instructions for claiming your gift card. So please keep an eye on your inbox. If you don't see it there, check your spam folder, please. All right. Again, just a reminder that the session has been recorded. You can go back and watch it again whenever you'd like. So we'll send an email out with further instructions for how to access it. You can always visit us too at devops.com/webinars, and it'll be there as well. All right, well, that wraps it up for me. I want to thank Eveline and Yasser so much for their time and their awesome presentation. We appreciate you in the audience joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon at another webinar. Thanks so much. I'm Sharon Florentine, signing off.